I had been keeping an eye on Baldur's Gate 3 throughout its early access period. I never played it in early access as I wanted to experience the finished product, but I heard nothing but good things about it throughout its development. I had never played a Larian game before, though I was aware of the Divinity franchise. I've also never played Baldur's Gate 1 or 2, so this is my first foray into the series. I love RPGs, and Baldur's Gate 3 seemed like it was going to be something that I would get lost in for a long time, and I was right. I ended up playing BG3 for 120 hours in one playthrough, which is the longest I've ever played a game for a single playthrough. I think one of the most impressive aspects of Baldur's Gate 3 is that Larian is an independent developer, despite having a few hundred employees. There are no shareholders to answer to, as Larian usually uses Kickstarter to help fund their games and early access. This business model has proven to work for them. I mean, you don't get a game like Baldur's Gate 3 without doing something right. I played Baldur's Gate 3 on PC for one playthrough on normal difficulty. This video will be spoiler free, save for some details about companions. The game looks incredible. BG3 is a CRPG and uses an isometric camera while exploring and during combat. You can move the camera around and zoom in really close to the action, but during cutscenes or dialogue, the camera is up close and personal. So Larian had to make sure that the graphics not only looked good from up top, but also in close, and they succeeded. Each location looks and feels handcrafted, with interesting layouts and tons of nooks and crannies to explore. Whether it's a dark, foreboding dungeon, the Underdark itself, or the sprawling city of Baldur's Gate with its many buildings and alleyways, there's almost always some intriguing characters or valuable loot to find. Every character model is extremely detailed. The lip syncing is surprisingly great for a game this big, and the animations are very well done for the most part. There will be the occasional odd-looking walking or combat animation, but those are easy to ignore. The voice acting from every single character, whether it's a main companion, villain, or some random NPC that only has a couple lines of dialogue, is of an amazing caliber. For a game this size, it's astonishing how high the quality of acting is across the board, and most of the voice actors are not well-known names. Some of them are though, like J.K. Simmons, who voices Ketherick Thorne, and no, he wouldn't pay me for my pictures of the Spider-Man. The game's music is phenomenal. At times it is bombastic and exciting, other times it's tense and atmospheric. Sometimes it's melodic and peaceful, but whatever the mood the game tries to convey, it does so with ease. The music makes heavy use of strings and orchestral instruments, but there are also at least a couple tracks with singing played at specific points in the story that make those moments very memorable. Particularly a boss fight near the end of the game. If you've played the game, you know what I'm talking about. Sound design in BG3 is great as well, just like everything else. The various sounds of magic that had to be created, the little audio stings that play when you enter and exit combat, the wide range of beasts and creatures that all sound uniquely terrifying and horrifying. It's all done to a high level. The game has a decent amount of options and settings. It's not the most extensive list I've ever seen, but it's certainly not the worst. Technically speaking, I did have a couple crashes and a handful of bugs and glitches throughout my playthrough. However, for 120 hours, the amount of issues I had felt like a drop in the bucket. The biggest complaint I have with the technical aspects of the game has to do with performance. The game has 3 acts, and while I didn't have any issues with the performance for the first 2 acts, as soon as you get to Act 3, the frame rate takes a noticeable hit. It didn't ruin the game or anything, but it was quite surprising given how well the game was performing up until that point. But credit where credit is due, Larian have been giving an enormous amount of post-launch support and updates that have smoothed out a lot of the wrinkles with the game, and all without any sign of microtransactions. For an example, players had lamented the fact that they could not alter their character's physical appearance after character creation, so Larian implemented a magic mirror in an update that would allow players to do just that. Larian have already stated that there will be no DLC for BG3, which is unfortunate for fans, but I'm sure that Larian will continue its post-launch support of the game for a good long while. Baldur's Gate 3 is an officially licensed Dungeons & Dragons game that takes place in the Forgotten Realms, which is the most popular D&D setting. It's also a sequel to Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, which both came out over 20 years ago and were originally developed by BioWare. You definitely don't need to have played the first 2 games to enjoy and understand the story of BG3, though there are characters from the first 2 games that show up throughout BG3. You begin the game on a nautiloid ship, having been abducted by mind flayers and infected with some sort of parasite. The ship is attacked attacked by Githyanki warriors, the sworn enemies of Mind Flayers, and in the ensuing battle you are freed from captivity and land in an area known as the Sword Coast. You quickly learn that the parasite in your head is trying to turn you into a Mind Flayer, and along with some companions who are also on the ship, you set out to find a way to remove the parasite before it transforms you. That brief summary doesn't really do justice to the tale that Larian have constructed. There are many interesting characters, locations, and quests that you'll encounter over the course of the game, and many times seemingly unconnected stories will converge, revealing how interconnected the game really is. There were at least a couple times where I was genuinely impressed by how well different quests ended up coalescing and concluding in an epic finale. The narrative takes a lot of twists and turns, and that's not even taking into consideration the player's choices. When I reviewed Wasteland 3, I said that it was one of the best RPGs I had played in terms of giving the player lots of different choices and options in how quests turned out, and actually had lasting consequences. I think Baldur's Gate 3 is even better. Each quest in the game can turn out so drastically different depending on how you choose to go about it. You can try and sneak your way through areas, you can go in swords blazing, you can try and talk your way out of trouble, and within those options you still have more options. For instance, if you're trying to be stealthy, would you crouch down behind someone to steal a key to a door, or would you try and lockpick it? Or would you use an invisibility spell, scroll, or a potion to just turn invisible and walk past all enemies or guards? Or would you use a spell like Misty Step to enter locations just by teleporting? Or if you tried to talk your way out of trouble, would you use intimidation to try and scare them into letting you do what you want? Or would you try and lie to them, or persuade them with your charm? Would you cast a spell to charm them first, or use detect thoughts to read their mind and gain some valuable intel to try and sway the conversation in your favor? And of course, that's not even talking about the different characters in the quest that you can ally with or betray or kill. Obviously, not every single one of those options exists for every single scenario, but the point is that there is almost always multiple ways to go about completing quests, and multiple ways for most quests to end. It's one of the most open-ended games I've ever played, both narratively and in its gameplay. BG3 tries to replicate the experience of playing a D&D campaign by having a narrator that will occasionally narrate the goings on of your adventure. It's a really nice touch. You can choose to play as either your own character from a selection of different backstories or an Origins character, which are characters with preset backgrounds and stories. All but one of the Origins characters are actually your companions for the game, which is a very interesting feature that I've never seen before in a game. The last character choice is called the Dark Urge, and is one of the most unique paths to take in the game, one that I won't spoil here. Speaking of companions, Baldur's Gate 3 has some of the best companion characters I've come across in any RPG. Whether it's Karlach, the fiery barbarian trying to escape from hell, or Astarion, who's definitely not a vampire, or Shadowheart, God's favorite princess. Almost every companion is incredibly fleshed out. There were a couple companions that just didn't click with me as much as the others, but I liked all of them. Each companion has their own quest that usually intersects with the main story in unexpected and interesting ways, and there are at least a couple different ways those quests can turn out for your companions. Baldur's Gate 3 does not shy away from letting the player be as good as they want or as evil as they want, and your companions will reflect those decisions. There is also an approval system with your companions. Whenever you make a decision or do something that a companion approves of, you will gain positive approval with them, and vice versa when you go against what your companions want. The higher your approval, the better the companions react to you when you talk to them, and if you ever have to make a roll for, say, persuasion against them, the difficulty will be adjusted based on their approval rating. You can also romance almost every companion regardless of gender, and I feel like the romances are very well done for the most part. Apparently, there was a glitch of some sort when the game was initially released, which meant that your companions were trying to get into your pants far quicker than they were supposed to, which led to a bevy of memes. I do have a handful of gripes with the story though, the biggest one being that I don't really think that all of the villains were that interesting. A couple of the main villains definitely felt fleshed out and intimidating, but the others just didn't make me feel much. The game also originally had a very weak ending. You saved the day and then it was just kinda over. There wasn't even like a slideshow showing what happened to your companions after the end like some RPGs do. It was very lackluster considering I had spent over 100 hours getting invested in this world and its characters. There has since been an expanded ending that definitely improves upon the original and offers some closure and satisfaction. I also think it's a little bit weird how quickly your character sort of becomes the leader of the group, considering that everyone else in the group are very headstrong and seemingly self-sufficient. And there are a couple side quests that are a little lame, but other than that, everything else is pretty great. This is one of the best written games I have ever played, and I actually teared up more than once while playing. It's very rare for a video game to give me those kinds of emotions, let alone more than once. One of the best decisions Larian made was making your character voiceless, meaning they could write as many dialogue options as they wanted without having to worry about the cost and time of recording and re-recording and editing those voice lines in male and female voices. I also appreciate just how unafraid the game is to be mature and weird. There is lots of sex and nudity, although it's not as frequent as the memes would have you believe. But you can legitimately play through the entire game naked along with your companions. And you can have sex with a druid that transforms into a bear, which isn't something I wanted to do, but I guess it appeals to someone out there. I guess what I'm trying to say is that this game feels like it was made by real people. This was not some product cooked up by unfeeling executives and greedy shareholders or CEOs. This wasn't some safe bet designed to appeal to as many people as possible and sanitized till all the rough edges were smoothed out. Too much art has been lost to the corporate desire to make money by sacrificing the art itself, whether that's in the music industry, the film industry, or my favorite, the gaming industry. So whenever I play a game like this, it just makes me happy. Gameplay in Baldur's Gate 3 mainly consists of combat, exploration, and talking to people. Before you do any of that though, you need to create your character. As mentioned earlier, you can play as the Origins characters, but if you choose to create your own from scratch, there are quite a few options to choose from. Since BG3 uses the Dungeons & Dragons license, you can find most of what you'd expect from the tabletop game. Just to be clear, I'm not going to explain all of the rules of D&D in this video and how they correlate to BG3 because you can make an entire video on just that alone. I'm also not going to delve into how BG3 adapts and modifies rules from D&D either, because even though I've dabbled here and there with playing D&D, I am by no means an expert. There are 11 different races in the game, everything from humans and elves to Githyanki and Dragonborn. Each race has their own features that give some sort of bonus or buff. Some races even have sub-races, lending even more customization. There are 12 classes to choose from, whether you want to be a melee-focused barbarian, a spell-slinging wizard, a charismatic bard, or anything in between. And I do mean anything in between because the game also allows you to multi-class, so if you want to have some sorcerer monk you can. Further, within each class there are also more than one path to take, plus various backgrounds that give certain skill bonuses as well. The amount of specialization is staggering. In terms of editing your character's appearance, the options are great. The one thing I think is odd is the lack of sliders for anything. Every face is pre-made, which is nice for people who either suck at making characters that look even remotely good with sliders, or who just lack the patience necessary to figure it out. Like me, I am both of those things. But it would have been nice for the people who can make their characters look less than ugly. To reiterate, every action you do in the game, whether in combat or in conversation, and even sometimes during exploration, is governed by random dice rolls, just like real D&D. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I am honestly not a huge fan of random chance in RPGs. You can add modifiers to give yourself an advantage in skill checks, you can use inspiration to reroll dice if you fail, and you can just save scum if you really want to succeed a check. But after playing BG3 for as long as I did, I came to the conclusion that while I wouldn't change BG3, I also wouldn't want this type of random chance to be implemented broadly across the genre, at least in regard to skill checks. One of the more annoying ways this comes into play is during exploration, with passive skill checks which just happen as you walk around. And if you fail a passive skill check, well, that's it. You don't get to try again, and if it happened to be, say, a trap that kills your whole party, well, just reload the save and hope that this time you don't get randomly screwed by the dice. Again, I wouldn't change it in this game, but I don't really want to see it become a trend in other games. Inspiration is granted by your companions whenever you do something that they approve of while they're in your party. For someone like Karlach or Will, it could be helping innocent people. For someone like Asterion, it could be being a selfish prick. Combat is turn-based, and the order of combat is determined by initiative rolls. Each character by default has an action and a bonus action they can perform during their turn, as well as any movement they are capable of. Some classes, like fighters, can gain additional actions. Generally speaking, main actions are your more powerful abilities, while bonus actions tend to be more utility, though that is not a hard and fast rule. BG3 also likes to spray your characters with blood like they just came out of Dragon Age Origins. There are many different ways combat can play out depending on who you have in your party, what classes they are, what abilities abilities they have and your own creativity and imagination. Would you like to put grease on the ground and then set it on fire to burn a whole host of enemies to ash? Or would you like to give your fighter advantage for the turn and then hit an enemy with 6 back-to-back strikes with action surge? If you get close to an enemy then decide to leave their immediate vicinity, they can get an opportunity attack on you and vice versa, so strategic and meaningful positioning is very important. Spreading your team out can be a good way to ensure that AoE spells can't hit your whole party, but you might not be as effective in combat depending on your team's composition. Some spells require concentration, meaning you can't cast any other spells if you want to continue using the effect of your concentrated spell. I do wish though that the game had a pop-up to warn you that using another spell would break your concentration, as I often would lose track of it during the heat of combat. The amount of depth the combat has is staggering, and I've just barely scratched the surface here, but again, the majority of the way it all works is from D&D. You can actually enter turn-based mode at any time during the game, which I found helpful whenever I was trying to be stealthy, as you can sort of cheese your way through some areas by entering and exiting turn-based mode. There are certain actions or abilities that can only be used a finite amount of times before you run out, as well as spellcasters having a specific amount of spell slots. To regain abilities and spell slots, you need to either do a short rest or a long rest. Short rests can be done at any point outside of combat and will heal your party a little, as well as restock some abilities. But long rest will heal your party fully and regain all your abilities and spell slots. You are required to travel to your camp to do a long rest, which can be done anytime outside of battle. Your camp is where you can switch out party members, chat with your companions, and encounter many story-related events. There are actually many different variations of the camp location, so whatever environment you are currently located in, the camp will reflect that, which is a very nice detail. Resting does require camp supplies, however, and if you don't have enough supplies for a full rest, then you will only partially regain health. However, I never once found myself lacking in camp supplies, so if you're keeping an eye out for resources, it shouldn't be a problem. One of the things I feel Baldur's Gate 3 has actually not gotten right is managing your party's inventories. For some reason, there is no easy way to view all of your party's inventories, not even while you're at camp. You can only view companions' inventories when they are in your party, so if you are trying to find a specific item, you have to first walk up to a current party member and ask them to wait at camp for a bit. Then you have to go up to the companion who you think has the item you need, ask them to join your party, then you can go through their inventory. Then you have to ask them to leave the party, then walk back to the first companion and ask them to rejoin. That is, if you were right about which companion had the item you needed. If not, then you just have to keep doing this until you finally find the item you're looking for. This is such a bizarre oversight, considering Dragon Age Origins managed to figure out how to do this right like 15 years ago. There is an extra system for gaining new abilities and powers that's related to the tadpoles in your head. You can consume other tadpoles you come across in the world and gain extra abilities. However, I never did this as the game really made it seem like doing this would have some negative consequences. But the extra powers are there for those who want to take that risk. One of the most impressive parts of the whole package, and one that I haven't actually interacted with yet, is that you can play the entire game co-op. Just the idea of going through the narrative and combat with 3 other people is actually a mind-boggling idea to me, and I have no idea how they managed to pull it off. Another thing I'll mention about the game that probably could have been done better is that there really isn't a great tutorial for most of the mechanics in the game. You kind of just have to figure it out, and speaking as someone who has played a decent amount of RPGs in the past, and with a passing familiarity with Dungeons & Dragons, there were still a few things that I wasn't quite sure of until a fair amount of playtime. So if you are someone who doesn't really have much knowledge of D&D or experience with RPGs in general, you might end up having a hard time coming to grips with a lot of the mechanics in the game, because I think Larian didn't really do that great of a job at explaining how things work. You can change the difficulty at any time, however, so if the combat is something giving you trouble, you won't end up being stuck. Baldur's Gate 3 is an absolute achievement in game design. From the presentation, to the story, to the gameplay, everything is of an extraordinarily high caliber that doesn't come along very often. Larian has made a fan out of me. It's rare to find a game with this kind of depth of gameplay as well as this level of emotional storytelling and just plain personality. I'm not quite sure how to sum up an adventure that lasted over 120 hours and had me thoroughly impressed and enthralled and excited the entire time. Yes, there are flaws, but none of them impacted my ability to enjoy the game to any noticeable degree, except maybe the inventory management. I think that Baldur's Gate 3 deserves all the awards and accolades and sales, and everything it got, it deserved. Larian has already said that there won't be any DLC for the game and they aren't planning on making a sequel. On the one hand, it's easy to be disappointed by that because I do want more, but this game is already so complete and Larian have been releasing so many patches and updates and new content that by the time they are actually done supporting the game, it will be even better than it is now. And it is already one of the best games I have ever played. So far on my channel, I have only ever given one game a 10 out of 10. That changes today. I'm going to give Baldur's Gate 3 a 10 out of 10. It is a masterpiece that I recommend to anyone who is even slightly interested in it. You know, the worst thing about playing a game like Baldur's Gate 3 is finishing it and getting used to not playing it anymore, and wondering when the next time you'll get to play something this good again will be. It's a strange feeling, but I'm sure you can relate to it. If you liked this video, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, and commenting your thoughts on the game below. Thanks for watching.